In this video today, we're going to be going over a series of differing tier lists that are kind of divided into differing ranks. And the first one we're going to be going over is this iron and bronze tier list based around improvement. What is the best for improvement? Now, joined with me today is AJ, a fellow MLA coach, high ELO NA challenger player, to help me break down the complexity of these tier lists and to kind of riff on a series of details. So, thanks for coming here today, AJ. I've dragged you in here for this controversial episode. So it's not me just going to be getting flamed for the YouTube comments.
Both of
It's you
us.
also.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we got here is the iron and bronze tier list. So, and level 30. If you're brand new to the game, you're very, very, very early on in your journey. This is kind of the way you want to be viewing the mid champions. So at the top we have S plus. These are the champions that are the training wheels of mid lane. They're going to get you to feel out what it's like to just play an archetypal mage. One thing you said, AJ, yesterday when we were kind of doing this tier list, you said it's like when you think of like a mage, right? When you just think of playing mid lane mage, you want to feel out these baseline concepts. Why do you think these champs for you, like, how do you kind of perceive them? Why do you think they're really important for beginners?
Right. So I think it's important to note that, like, when we're a newer player or you're a player trying to get your feet wet with mid lane, it's like, what is the fantasy of a mid laner, right? You want to get in there, pump your damage out, get that priority, use your priority to leverage and make plays, right? That's kind of the essence of being a mid laner. And I think the reason why both Malzahar and Brand fit these goals really, really well, especially when you're learning mid lane and you've got the training wheels on, is that they allow you to deal your damage very, very easily, right? Malzahar, he's got his E, he's got his minions, his R is point and click. Same thing with Brand, the spread is automatic. So these champs allow you to kind of like just play the game, right? We get
Just
to
gonna
play the
play the
game of League
game.
of Legends as a mid laner. You get to get in there, get your damage in, push in your waves in the early game, rotate to plays, play neutral objectives, and you just get to feel what it's like to be a mid laner. I think that's
And,
really
and
the key strengths.
and I think here the key here is a lot of people can say, "Oh, but Curtis and AJ, aren't you going to bypass too many fundamentals?" Remember, the game isn't about fundamentals in Iron and Bronze. Fundamentals are not even a thing. You shouldn't even be worrying about fundamentals when you're in
Yeah.
Iron and Bronze. Fundamentals actually don't really get introduced, or you shouldn't even be thinking about them until Silver.
Hmm.
Now, this is a whole different conversation. We're not going to be getting into this in this video, but the whole term fundamentals, I've been very critical of it. I think it is the wrong terminology. Fundamentals, in traditional sport, you would think of like basketball, it's like learning how to dribble and things like that, right?
Yeah.
That's not really the case in League of Legends. Fundamentals have been dragged through the mud a little bit. So,
Yeah.
look, we'll save that discussion for another time. I get it why it's very confusing, especially if you're new, you're hearing fundamentals. Surely I should be focusing on that at the very beginning of my journey. No, you shouldn't. The actual baseline, like if we're talking about what the core of the game actually is at the very, very beginning, is actually understanding what every champion in the game does. The equivalent actual game fundamentals of League is understanding what all the champs do, what all the items do, how the flow of the game feels, minions, goal, like basics of just pumping up basic damage, feeling out damages, feeling out limits, and just scrapping and fighting. And that's what Malzahar and Brand are really good at getting you to feel, because your mental stack isn't going to be super, super tunnel visioned on whatever's in front of your face, right? It's not going to be timing trades with last hits and being super particular about your last hitting and super particular about your wave management and super particular about your resets. You have a lot more flexibility to work with, such that your mental stack can actually just feel it. Oh, there's a play there, I can shove and move. Oh, there's a team fight, I can pump out a bit of damage. You can just really feel out the basics of the game. Okay, so moving on to the second tier here. These are champions that, they have, again, ease of execution. They have relatively clear reference points and identities. You kind of know what you're getting yourself into. And then I would also say as well, yeah, they're quite forgiving, right? They're quite forgiving. So we've got ASOL. Let's just go with ASOL. ASOL and Swain, I guess they're similar. You got a lot of AoE, great team fighting. You have a bit of wave clear. They tick a lot of boxes in that regard. What really jump out to you in this category here, AJ?
Yeah, so I want to talk about ASO and Vigar first. I think they're in their own little separate thing. Whereas like these champs, they let like cycling back to what we were talking about first, they let you play the entire game, right? Like ASOL, you got, a little bit of like interaction in the early laning phase, but you get to scale up, you get to learn like, okay, how do I interact with my passive to get some last hits, right? With my E and my Q. I get to learn, okay, my R is this big ultimate nuke button. How do I use that to fight, right? What does that look like? But not to mention, these champs also have that late game scaling factor. So there's no pressure on you to have to kind of up the speed earlier on in the game. And because typically Iron and Bronze games last a little bit longer because there's a lot more chaos, people don't really know how to close out games. This gives you kind of the ability to leverage onto that and give you some time to like kind of just feel out the game, each stage of the game, get distinctive with, okay, what's the early game? What does the early game feel like? What's the mid game? What's the mid game feel like? But then also the late game, right? You get to feel out, you actually get to feel what it's like to play a powerful late game champ. You kind of get like the whole picture of League of Legends. And again, you really get to feel out what it's like to play the game. That's why I really like ASOL and Vigar here, especially in Iron and Bronze and
Yeah.
A.
And you can be rough around the edges. Like at the
Hmm.
end of the day, as Vigar especially,
Yeah.
you can be a bit inefficient. You just plop
Yeah.
down that E, you're going to provide utility. You
Yeah.
throw those Qs and Ws, you're probably going to hit
That's right.
some of them. Like, and your R's point and click. It's not overly complicated. You're going to feel that. And I will say Vigar, just from anecdotal experience in my
Hmm.
program, Vigar has a ridiculously high win rate in the MLA.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy. Everyone who plays Vigar gets results. The only thing holding people back from playing Vigar is that people just don't have a lot of fun with him for whatever
Yeah.
reason.
Right.
So Vigar is insane for just results in filling out the game just from sheer success. Now Swain. Now look, obviously Swain's undergoing a bit of a rework at the moment. I'm not look. I'm making this video. We're making this video through the lens of like where Swain was previous pre rework. I think it's probably going to be the same. But Swain was a champ that completely it came out of nowhere for me in the MLA, and it's a champ that I realized over time was incredibly good for learning. It had a relatively strong early lane. The Q was really easy to hit. You could again be quite inefficient with your kit and still provide a shit ton of utility and damage with your R. And more importantly, it really got people in the fighting mindset. It's like there's a fight, there's a team fight, get in there. There's a bit of a scrap in the river, get in there. As long as you and it teaches you the basics of playing around your R, like ASOL does. Getting to your key spikes, and you really feel that. You'll be like, oh, okay, I got my relays. Wow, that actually makes a hell of a lot of difference. You'll really be rewarded for being like building particular items, and the spikes are very kind of pronounced. This is what I really like about Swain. And then lastly here we have Vex. Vex is an interesting one because look, Vex people may make an argument for Vex to be in the B tier. I think that's
Mhm.
also completely fine. We put him at the bottom. And by the way, guys, probably we should have probably started with this. We've
Yeah.
ordered this in terms of this direction. So we've got Asol Vigar. We would rate them probably slightly higher than the Swain and
Mhm.
Vex. And then so it's all this is the way you probably want to read it. But we haven't ordered the bottom one. The bottom one is not ordered, which is probably a little bit confusing, but just to give you guys a heads up. Vex. So what do you like about Vex, AJ?
Well, the main strength of Vex is the wave clear aspect, right? I think
Mm.
when people think about Vex, I like to compare it a little bit similar to like a Nico or Annie, where you kind of got this like you want enemies to come into you in the early lane, you kind of press and poke them on the early lane, then you're a burst champion, right? But the main difference between Vex and Annie is that there's no, you're not. It's much more difficult to be overwhelmed with her kit. You can get a lot of mileage out with Vex's kit, even with a very surface or more basic understanding of Vex, right? It's like, okay, my job is I use my E on the wave, and I use my Q on my wave to push. I have this beautiful long range ult. I'm going to look for picks. I'm going to play this assassin style, but I also have some aspects of a mage that I can use. I have the wave clear, right? I don't have a long auto attack range that I need to leverage. I don't need to time my shield like you do with Annie, right? I think Vex just gives you a good amount of options. And again, really just tying back to the mentality you need to have. It lets you just feel out the game. It lets you feel like what it's like. Okay, what is it like to time my engage as an assassin? What is it like to come from a flank? What is it like to get priorities in assassin? What is it like
Mm.
to come from fog of war? Right? Sure, you won't have a sophisticated understanding of all this stuff, but lets you feel what that's like. I think
Mm.
Vex is like the best champ for that, right? And that's actually why I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. That's why we have Neferi right next to Vex. They're
Mm.
similar in the sense that Neferi, sure, she's a melee champ, so you got to worry about range and getting poked out. But at the same time, Neferi gives you these tools to learn, okay, I'm gonna go in at this particular moment. What's gonna happen, right? Just play around with it, have fun with it. It's like, okay, I'm against this champion. I go in and they dash away. Well, that's interesting. Well, what about this champion's kid that I not learn, right? And so now this teaches you a lot about how other champions interact with you as well. So that's why I really like Vex and Neferi a lot.
Yeah, no, spot on. And Neferi also has wave clear. Like it's not. I
Hmm.
mean, it's not amazing,
Yeah.
but it's doable. And also, with the great thing about both these champions, what I like about you compare Vex and Neferi to say like like a Fizz.
Yeah.
Fizz doesn't have any non-committal
Yep.
trading ability. Whereas Vex, if you don't want to go in, you can just poke with EQ. Or a Neferi, if you don't want to go in, you can just poke with Q. So you're not tied to
Hmm.
constantly having to all in your opponent. So that gives it's not as overwhelming. You have this ranged aspect as like a diver, which is really, really cool. Yeah, so I guess moving on to the B tier, these are champions that look, they're a little bit harder. There may be look, like if we just get specific, like you mentioned, the Fury, it's more through that assassin lens, a little
Yep.
bit trickier, maybe a little
Hmm.
bit less forgiving, but again, has clear reference points, relatively ease of execution, and again, very flexible lane phase. Lux, just a lot of skill shots.
Yeah.
That's why we've kind of put it in here, but still not overly complicated. Will get you to feel out what it's like the significance of landing key abilities. It is quite forgiving. You will be able to pump out a lot of damage in those front to back team fights. And a lot of people just enjoy Lux. I think Lux, a lot of people, it gives you that kind of mage fantasy of
Yeah.
like, okay, I've got a lot of range, I've got a lot of damage. As long as I land those abilities, I'm going to be
Yeah.
fine. Um, Galio's interesting. Galio is a champion that it's kind of like I liken it similar to a Swain, where it
Hmm.
really gets you in the fights. You're going to provide a lot of utility. It forces you to not be afraid to fight and get in the action, and that's what I love about Galio. It's like you got to get in there. You're going to E
Hmm.
forward. You're gonna send it. Yeah, it's going to be a bit messy, but it doesn't have to be clean because the champ
Yeah.
rewards you for making the games a little bit messy. And so I think Galio is one of those champs that kind of forces you to interact with many other different champions. So it's like a forcing function of learning the game. That's what I really love about Galio. And again, has wave clear. Like if you
Yeah.
you can just shove, move, shove, move,
Hmm.
shove, move, and that's very oppressive. Um, any other comments about Galio, or you?
Yeah, so I kind of want to like highlight both Galio and Swain. What you were talking about that I really liked. What you said was it teaches you how to fight. One thing that can be really intimidating for a newer player or someone who doesn't know what all the champions do is fighting. It can be really there's a lot of anxiety about all that. It's like, oh, I'm going into this play. I'm a squishy like for example, like let's even take Vex. If you're a Vex, it can be very, very intimidating to go into a fight as Vex. You're like, okay, I'm playing against Jax. What the heck does Jax do? I don't even know what his abilities do. But like when you play Galio and Swain, there's so much effectiveness in their kit for just going in. You don't have to know what every champ does. And that actually gives you the leeway to learn what other champs do, how to actually fight, how to approach fights, because they have so much room for error, right? Like
Mhm.
Galio, get in there, get all your damage out. Swain, get in there, get your ults running. That's why I really love these two champions, right? They just force you to get in this fighting mindset. They force you to learn what other champions do, and it kind of eases you out of the anxiety that you might feel as a squishy ranged
Yes.
mage when it comes into fighting.
I love that. I love that. And that is something we see. We see people
Yeah.
get scared to fight. They're
Yep.
scared to go in. They're scared to interact. And these champions really encourage you to get in the action and feel it out. Anivia. Now, look,
Mm.
I was initially on the fence with Anivia. Anivia is, again, very similar to Malzahn Brand in the sense it is a
Mhm.
training wheels champion. It's not a long term, it's not really something we would recommend later on in your journey, but it does have post level 6 good quality wave clear. You're a very El Clasico front to back. You are gonna obviously it's not gonna like your pre 6 is obviously going to be a little bit trickier. The W can be actually quite awkward to use. This is why it's in B tier and not A or S.
Mhm.
So it is a training wheels, AoE type mage, but it's just a
Mhm.
little bit more complex, a bit more skill shots, and more tied to your ultimate. So very forgiving.
Mhm.
You have that tankiness, durability of building rower a lot of the time. You have that egg, so it can really just encourage you to get in there, maybe not be as timid.
Mhm.
So look, whether you agree with that, I think some people may say, well, what you just said shouldn't it be C? I think it could be C, it could be B.
Mhm.
It's somewhere in the mix though, so it's a bit of a hit or miss one. Okay, so then we've got Morgana and Seraphine. I'd kind of
Mhm.
group these together, right? These are
Mhm.
very, very people may say non-interactive type mid laners, similar to that of Malzahar. I would say that the reason we've put it in B and not S or A is because, well, number one, a little bit more skill shot oriented, right? A lot more skill shots. Their trading probably not as intuitive. And again, maybe a little bit more utility focused rather than just
Yeah.
pumping out damage, right? So you are going to be able to feel impactful with these champions and you will
Mm.
get success. The reason I prefer Mal's and Brand is that they're just kind of pure damage and you don't really
Yeah.
have to think as much about the utility aspect. Like with Seraphine, you really got to think about your empowered W.
Mm.
You really got to think about
Yeah.
when you're getting your root off, which empowered ability you're going to choose. And Morgana, who you're going to spell shield. When are you going to like it's a bit, it's just
Yeah.
another layer of complexity, which you're probably not going to be able to fully
Yeah.
understand until you get a little bit higher. So, yeah, any other comments about these ones, AJ?
No, I think you hit it spot on. I think the only thing I'll add is that because these champs both have a utility and like a little bit of a damage aspect that mix, people struggle to merge those two into a coherent champion at this rank. So what happens is that I see Seraphine players are way over indexed on the utility portion where they're like, okay, I don't need to do any damage. I'm not
Too
going to use my
supportive.
Q or E. I'm pure support. But then on the other hand, I see Seraphine players who never leverage the W, right? They're like, nope, I have no idea how to use my W. I'm just going to go in, bam, get my R, get my E, get my Q. So I think that can be a problem with these champs. That's why they're not higher up for me personally.
Yeah.
Is that the people kind of diverge into two aspects. Not really mesh. It doesn't really feel like a whole complete mesh champ. Like when you play Brand, it's all damage. You know exactly what you need to learn. I need to get in there, get my damage in, get the hell out.
Same as Swain, right? It's like
Same as Swain.
all pure
As Malzahar.
damage for the most
Yeah.
part. Same as Malzahar. Like it,
Yeah.
yeah, you're spot on. And I think as well, like these champions, they can force you down that supportive mindset
Yeah.
too much. It's like
Mhm.
if you fall down that rabbit hole of, oh, I can just sit back and throw out binds
Yeah.
and spell shields or Seraphine heals, it's like you're not encouraged to necessarily fully
Yes.
interact. So
Exactly.
they can be used well. They can be effective training wheels, but it's not always guaranteed. They can be misinterpreted and misused. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Victor, look, I think Victor is just a really good mage. It obviously is a little bit more complicated mechanically. The E is not exactly an easy skill shot for beginners to use, but it is, a lot of damage, boatload of damage, a lot of AoE. It has good wave clear. It has kind of the foundation of like a beautiful kind of El Clasico control mage. The only reason it's not higher up is, again, I would say difficulty of execution mechanically. But from an archetype perspective, it's great. And then moving into C. Look, these are champions that are just a little bit more complex mechanically for the most part. I don't think we need to go too in depth. You kind of have, Ahri. Look, it has wave clear. You are going to get in the thick of it and fight people, which is great. But getting your damage off is hard for people. A lot of people don't know how to deal with damage with Ahri. They're going to be missing their Qs. They're going to be missing those charms. They're not going to be autoing before their W, so the W is going to be on the minions. Just trading with Ahri is actually not exactly easy. It's not a champion that I would recommend at this Elo bracket. It's not as bad as, say, obviously like a Rise or something, but it's definitely not easy. So that's that. Would you add anything onto that one?
Yeah, one really big thing I've noticed with Ahri players specifically, or just any of these kind of assassin or lower damage champions, is that it's not even just about how to get your damage off. Like some people sure struggle with that. It's where you allocate your damage towards. I get so many questions all the time as Ahri, hey, I'm struggling with tanks. Hey, how do I deal with Set? How do I deal with Gasante? But the reality is that's not your job. And that's actually what makes Ahri lower on this list, in my opinion. It's guys got to remember, from Iron and Bronze, it's against the training wheels. We don't need to add these layers of complexity with ours. Like, hey, like against tanks, sure, you can play against them if you have good kiting with your E and W. But the reality is like, let's just figure out how do we do damage to people. And the problem with Ahri is you just don't have that aspect of your kit to rely on, right? I think that's really the major thing for Ahri for me.
Yeah, you got to be very particular about how you navigate those fights. Exactly right. So you don't need the nuance with a lot of these other champs. You can be a little bit rough around the edges, but you can't really afford to be rough around the edges with Ahri. You got to be more of like surgical. Echo, the good thing about Echo is that he does have wave clear.
Yeah.
Me and you probably, this is the champ that me and you probably differ on a little bit. The reason I actually personally am a big fan of Echo is because I believe he does teach good assassin kind of gameplay. Again, because at this Elo bracket, it's not necessarily about fundamentals. That's why he's in C tier. I think I rate Echo actually very highly in silver and gold. We'll get to that later on. But I think that it has wave clear. It can be relatively easy to execute. Like, you are relatively forgiving. Like, you can go in, you get a bit caught out, you can you have a decent amount of AoE. Like, you can pump out a decent amount of damage. I think it's still not easy to execute,
Yeah.
like super easy to execute mechanically. So that's why it's in C. But I think we'll talk more about Echo later on
Yeah.
in the next one.
Hmm.
And then I would say similar to Dinah again.
Similar.
It's similar to what we mentioned with Ari as well. You've got to be
Hmm.
particular about who you go
Yep.
in on. And also, I would say Dinah's not forgiving at all with the way you
No.
go in, right? You don't have that
Nope.
forgiving element. Once you're in, you're in.
Yep.
There's no
Yep.
getting out. Um, Lissandra. Lissandra, it's similar to what we were mentioning before, I think, with the Morgana and the Seraphine. A lot of
Hmm.
utility. A lot of
Yep.
utility. It is good damage, but you are low range,
Short range.
short range, and it can be hard to get your damage off sometimes. And if your utility is not being used at the right time, you can feel a little bit useless. Like
Yeah.
if you're looking at that, I just want to pump out a lot of AoE. Why not just play any of these like higher up tier champs? You know what I mean? Like, so that's why it's just not something that we would tend to recommend. It's not terrible,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of easier champions.
Yeah, and I think the thing I'll add with Lissandra is that, again, if we're talking about the classic mid lane like view slash archetype, it's kind of counterintuitive to play a mage but be such short range, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're playing this mage fantasy. If you're new to the game, you're Iron, like, oh, I like Liz. She's like a cool mage, an
And you have
ice
to
mage.
go in. You have to
You have
like
to
get
go
into
in.
melee
It's like,
range.
whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, wait a minute. I have to go in as a squishy mage. And this was tying back to why I like Galio and Swain much more than Liz. Because think about how much anxiety it is to be a short range burst mage with CC. And you have to figure out, okay, if I go in and I mess up my timing as a mage, I'm screwed, right? Like that's very, very intimidating. So
Yeah.
yeah, she does teach a lot of good things, but there's also a lot of like intimidating aspects about Lissandra that can really ruin somebody's journey, to be honest, and make them
Mm.
feel weird about mid. It's like, whoa, I'm playing mid lane, but I'm playing this champ that's to go in the short range.
Do I R myself? Do I R the
Exactly.
enemy? You know,
Yeah,
that sort of thing,
that's right.
100%. And then look, we can probably group all these
Yeah,
four in a
agreed.
similar bracket, just hard mechanically, right?
Yeah,
A lot of skill shots, really simple. I don't want to go too much. They're relatively immobile. They do have range, which is good, and they can pump out damage. But the way you get off that damage is you got to be a little bit more particular, and especially
yeah,
for a lot of these, they do require small wins. It's not about big wins; it's about small wins.
yeah,
And that's not exactly intuitive, and you do have to have a lot of the time decent lane fundamentals to leverage the strengths of these particular champions, which is just not really where we're at in our journey yet.
yeah,
Yep, and then we have Talia. So Talia is okay. So a lot of people may think, why isn't Talia an F?
mm,
So the difficulty, the challenge Talia faces is your R does no damage, pure
yeah,
utility. But the rest of the kit is a lot of AoE, a lot of wave clear. You can just start smashing out Qs, throwing out E's. You can be rough around the edges, and you probably can do a bit of damage. Still, very skill shot oriented, like a lot of these other champions. So again, that's why it's as low as it is, and then the R does no damage. But like, I would much rather we just can't put Talia next to a Silas or a
yeah,
Jace.
no,
I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like,
yeah,
it is just that a little bit above.
yeah.
Anything else about Talia?
So just in general, at the bottom of C tier, I think these champs they have good things about them, but they have this little too much complexity for iron and bronze, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That is the thing. I mean, they're not in D because they're not like Azir, obviously, like Curtis was mentioning. But
Mm.
I don't feel comfortable putting them in B either because they have like if we just take Ori for example, the little small wins mindset adds actually so much complexity that a lot of people don't realize such take for granted, right? So especially if you're again an iron or bronze player, you're not going to understand the small wins details. You're not going to really keep track of your ball very well. You're going to feel really overwhelmed against tanks. There's just a lot of problems about their kits that even though sure, yeah, they do in theory teach a lot, it just you can't leverage it a
You
lot.
can't leverage it. It's
Yes.
overwhelming, and you
Yes,
can't
it's
even
overwhelming.
you won't even be able to leverage the fact that
Yeah.
you can cast abilities while moving
Yeah, exactly.
because you're clicking and your movement won't
Yeah.
be good enough. Everyone is mistethering anyway, so it doesn't even matter.
Exactly.
Exactly right. So that yeah, you're spot on. And then last we have Annie, and this is something that we spoke about recently with LS. And Annie, the big challenge Annie faces is the no wave clear.
Yeah.
That's Annie's big weakness. That
Mhm.
it does get punished in the lower Ela brackets. The amount of times I've come into a review and they're playing Annie v Lux, Annie v Galio, Annie v Anivia, Annie v
Yep.
any of these champions. Like, and the common complaint is I feel like I'm just
Stuck under turret.
I'm stuck under my tower. I'm
Yeah.
not doing anything because in order to not get shoved in, you've really got to understand the fundamentals of mid lane, and that's just not really where my head would be at because when you're in iron and bronze, you're so overwhelmed by everything
Yep.
happening around you. It's just very overwhelming to develop your
Yeah.
skills. It's too much too quickly.
Yeah.
I will probably have to do a whole nother video separately on Annie because
Yeah,
again, it's something that a lot of people
very
don't really
complex.
very complex and people don't fully understand. So yeah, you have to bear with me on, but that's the baseline point of that one.
Yeah.
And then all of these other champs here, guys, they're just either too complex, crazy ass reference points. They don't, or too mechanically demanding from a skill shot perspective. Et cetera, et cetera. A lot of them are relatively self-explanatory. Did you say anything else here?
Yeah, one thing I just want to add and get aligned with everybody that the design of this tier list and the tier list going forward that we have in this video, it's meant for how do you learn the game in an effective manner, right? Now,
Yes.
fun is a very subjective thing. What you enjoy playing is very subjective. So if you're like, look, Curtis, AJ, I don't care what you guys have to say. I love Yasuo. I love Yone so much. I'm gonna play champs no matter what. Look, it's fine. You can do it. But just you gotta remember you gotta temper and realize that the expectation is that it's going to take you a long time to learn and develop the feel for the game, how to fight, learn what the other champions do, right? You're just going to feel very, very overwhelmed. And from a coaching perspective, these are not really champs that are great for actually learning how to play the game of League of Legends, which is really what Iron and Bronze is all about. It's like,
Yep.
let's learn what
Play
League
the
of Legends
game.
is about. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, a common question we get is size of pools. If you're an Iron and
Yeah.
Bronze, how many champs should you play? So, look, I think really, if you're really you're really sold on improving at League as fast as humanly possible, what you would want to do is you would want to have one at a time and then cycle through.
Yeah.
Right. So you would, let's say you play Mals, you play that for 60 games, then cycle through to Brand, then play 60 games of Brand, then play 60 games of this and play six. Just go through and cycle through champions one at a time. Look, if you are the type of person that doesn't like that, you really, really want to play true champions, then go for it. You can also play true champions. I think that is completely okay. But if we're min-maxing, the one champ at a time would be great. And then look, no way, shape, or form should you be playing more than two champions at a time. Now, moving on to the silver and gold tier list. So what you'll notice straight away, comparing this one to the iron and bronze one, is that there's been some massive shifts in terms of some of the complex champions being ramped up in the tier lists. And so again, at a high level, AJ, this tier list, the way we've thought about it is that we want to kind of take off the training wheels,
Mhm.
right? It's not necessarily about learning the game. It's about now learning the fundamentals. So
Yes.
learning the fundamentals is now the most important thing. So things that typically we talk about with silver and gold clients are mid lane fundamentals, warding and leaning, resets, wave management. And in gold, matchup understanding, really getting into the nitty gritty of your matchup understanding. At this point, we would expect that players know what all the champs do, have an understanding of the flow of the game, feel out damages. They kind of know the baseline identity of most champs. And so now we're starting to really get a little bit more granular. And this is why, as we go straight away into the S tier, these are champions that really reward you for good quality fundamentals. So let's start with Victor. Why do we rate Victor so highly?
So I really think the key thing about Victor, or even like just the mages at the top of the list, is it teaches you, number one, how to trade in lane, right? It teaches you how to have effective warding and leaning and have a good quality threat assessment. It teaches you how to be early for neutral objectives and play towards the mage's identity. And it gives you this nice little in between of being complex enough where you actually have to kind of interact and start learning these things, these fundamentals, but not overly complex where you're like overwhelmed that you don't even know how to learn the fundamentals because you're so focused on piloting your champ, right? And so again, bringing it back to Victor, look, the reality is that after laning phase, you have like one major ability that you're using for fights, right? It's your E. So you can put all your attention and focus on all the other things. It's like, okay, how do I utilize getting to a neutral fight early, right? How do I utilize vision, right? And good quality warding. How
Threat
do I
assessment.
how do I yeah, who's you know, like putting me under threat?
Hmm.
Um what does the enemy want to do to me, right? Like what does the enemy mid laner want to do to me? But you also got some other tools, right? Like you got your W for a little bit of zone control. You can start to introduce and learn and understand how to play a control mage, right? You got a really big high damage R button, so he's still forgiving in that aspect. Where
Hmm.
if somebody gets onto you, boom, drop the R, you're still pumping damage, right? He's
Yeah.
got a tiny little bit of utility with the slow from his W eventually. Once you get the passes ramped up, it's just a nice, really well balanced champ that gives you a little bit of everything
Yeah.
without it feeling too complicated, but not too easy at the same time.
Yeah, and because you also have so many favorable matchups as well with
Yeah.
Victor that you're gonna have a really like you're gonna be rewarded for good
Mhm.
quality fundamentals immediately. Like if you have good your timing your ease with last hits, you're doing all these things that Asia was saying,
Yeah.
you will be immediately rewarded and you will
Mhm.
feel it very, very quickly. So yeah, Victor is kind of a champ that I've noticed is just great for learning mid lane mage fundamentals.
Yeah.
Now, Swain, kind of what we were mentioning before, Swain, we feel as though just teaches good everything. It forces you to
Mhm.
be really aware of your spikes and troughs.
Yeah.
It forces you to be good, even good mechanically, landing, nailing those E's, timing those E's with last hits. It rewards you for good quality spacing and tethering to land those Qs. It forces you to play off your R cooldown. It forces you to be aware of your jungler's location to complement your team in river fights. It does teach you a very good, again, archetypal,
Mhm.
more battle mage oriented way of playing mid lane. And because it's not too complicated, but it's not too simple, it gives you a really great foundation that will develop skills that will transfer to many other different
Yeah.
champions. Anything else on Swain?
Yeah, one thing I'll add about Swing that I really like is that it's very clear about what you're doing well and what your mistakes are. Like, for
Mm,
example, if you play a champ like Swain and you decide to take a fight without your R, it is very crystal clear to understand why that went poorly from your own reference point perspective. Very clear, right?
mm,
Almost no other champ on this list has something that clear, in my opinion. Like,
yeah.
even just tying back to the Victor, you can still make it work even without your R. But like
Mm,
Swain, you fight without your R, you fight without your first item, and you instantly die. It's like, well, there's a ton of learning there that goes into that. But then if you do something well, like you get a nice quality E because you're patient with your E, right? You play beautiful kind of like zone control front to back fight with your R up and you win a big neutral fight. That rewards you really heavily. It's like, oh, well, this type of champion likes these types of plays, right? It's like this champ makes it very, very easy to figure out what you're doing well and what you're doing wrong, which is very good for teaching the game, right? Because then you can use that process for a little bit more of the complex champs. So champs are a little bit more vague and have a little bit more of a gray area. So I think this is a great champ where it's like, yeah, you don't have the training wheels on anymore, but you're still getting that nice feedback from Swain.
mm.
That's what I really like
I
about
love
him.
that. And also with
Yeah.
summoners, like if there's some
Yeah,
fights where
exactly.
you just need your ghost or you need your flash, and if you don't have it, you're going to get punished for it. Great, love it. And then we got a Fury, similar to what we mentioned before in the previous slide as well. It's just a really good assassin. Teaches you beautiful assassin fundamentals. You got to know you got to know your limits. You know your wave management's got it. You'll be rewarded for good quality wave management. You'll be heavily rewarded for playing off your key spikes. It's just an El Clasico
Yeah.
assassin. There's not really much to it. It will teach you everything you need to know
Yep.
about playing assassins. You'll be heavily rewarded for it, and you'll be heavily punished for it. I don't think there's much else to be said there. And like
Nope.
I think we've already touched on Syndra and
Mhm.
Oriana.
Similar to
They
Victor.
similar to Victor. They've got clear. They teach you that small wins mindset, which is crucial. Your warding leanings has to be on point because you have no mobility.
Mhm.
Positioning is a hugely important thing. Your threat assessment. It will force you to again, develop skills that are going to carry on through the remainder of your League of Legends career.
Yep.
Very important. So then we have the next tier here, which are again like champions that have really good, clear reference points. They know they have clear identities. They know it's very clear to see what a good fight and bad fight for the most part looks like. And again, are heavily rewarded for good fundamentals. I liken Vex to similar to Fury. You know,
Yeah.
you'll be rewarded for picking the right target.
Mhm.
You'll be rewarded for coming in from the right angle. You'll be incentivized to understand fog of war a little bit more, multi-threat
Yeah.
a little bit more. You'll be rewarded for having good quality resets and tempo. You get rewarded for these concepts directly. And then again, like so, I think if you're interested in more that dive-oriented style, the Fury and Vex should be the
Yeah.
ones that you really kind of try first anyway. And then we have ASOL, similar to what we mentioned before very, very clear reference points,
Mhm.
very defined spikes. You'll be rewarded for having good fundamentals. If you can minimize a lot of these tough early lanes, keep the wave in conservative positions, min max your farm, be intentional about your resets, say no to plays. That's what ASOL, I think, teaches.
Yeah.
Learning how to say no. If you learn to say no, okay, I don't have R, I'm not yet on my Rylai's, or I have no mana, okay, I can say no to that, and you'll get heavily rewarded. I would say the X factor for ASOL, which I do like, is that it also is one of the few majors that will incentivize you to also be a little bit more aware of the map holistically.
Yeah.
That's the skill that ASOL develops that maybe these other champs wouldn't. Where it's like if you're interested in also playing the map, and let's say I say I love ASOL for people who want to eventually transition into a more map style oriented play.
Mm.
If you eventually want to play a Talia down the line, or you want to play, or you want to play even other assassins or TFs or whatever the hell it is down the line, I think ASOS a really great kind of stepping stone if that's the direction you want to go through. And I would say similar to Ari in that sense. What do you think, AJ?
Yeah, I think I really love what you said there about ASOL, and just picking back off of what you said, I think ASOL teaches you some more esoteric things. Like, for
Mm,
example, I think ASOL is really good at teaching you how to make the enemy sweat for their wins, which is like a
mm.
very underrated thing. Like the mindset is not something people think about when they talk when we're talking about champions. But I think ASOL teaches you
Like
such an
poise.
amazing mindset: the poise, the patience, make the enemy sweat, wait for the enemy to outplay themselves, wait for them to make the mistake. You don't really get that, especially on a champ like Swain. That would be the one downside of
Yeah.
Swain. You don't really get that, but as ASOL, you really get this like esoteric. You can't measure that. Like I can't
Mm.
tangibly tell you this is going to give you X amount of success, but that mindset will carry on for every champ for the rest of your league journey. So that's why I
Yeah.
really like ASOL. Like you said, you wait for the enemy to make a mistake. You get to your key spikes. You play around your old cooldown. You play beautiful fights. But then again, yeah, also the mindset, right, and the poise and patience that you just don't really develop that much on some of these other champions.
Yeah, and I think ASOL, one thing one of the themes of all these champions is that you're heavily rewarded
Yeah.
instantaneously. There's no question about it for
Yes.
good fundamentals. Like if you tick all the boxes with ASOL, it's like, okay, I'm on my key spikes, I have my R, I'm with my team. It's like, wow, it's like I can feel it immediately. I
Yeah.
know I'm doing the right thing, which is
Mhm.
huge. Ari, look, Ari, we think it's not easy, but again, you're silver gold. You know, you're not a beginner anymore, and I think Ari is that really, it's that kind of, again, similar bridge champ. If you want to play
Yeah.
assassins and you're a mage player, I think it's a great introduction to kind of branching you away from those immobile mages. It gives you mobility, gets you feel that out. I think what Ari teaches you is ability usage. I
Yes.
think that's what Ari is the queen of, like teaching you good quality ability usage.
Mhm.
And it's just, you go into a fight, you miss your charm, you're not going to get the kill. You go into a
Yeah.
fight and you land your charm, you probably are going to get the kill. You hit your Q, you're going to pump out a lot of damage. If you miss your Q, you're not going to do much damage. So I think that Ari does give you that kind of clear indicator of
Yeah.
what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And I also think it's just, again, like a great bridge champion to a lot of the other
Yes.
champions in the game as well. What else would you say about Ari?
I think another small thing I would add about RA, where you're kind of factoring that bridge factor, is your lane kind of changes dynamic depending on the level you're in. Like first of all,
Mm,
like levels 1 to 5, you're kind of playing a little bit akin to a Victor and Ori. Sure, not
mm,
nearly as much, but you kind of got to be in that mindset. Hey, how do I do good quality trades? How do I punish the enemy on cooldowns? How do I actually land my Q? Right? What does it actually feel like to land a skill
mm.
shot? Right? But then once you hit like that level 7, that level 9, you get your ult. You transition and pivot from a lane centric champion to more of like, okay, how do I play the map? Right? Kind of similar to ASOL. How do I find good quality fights? How do I play to my reference points? So that's what I really like about Ari. Now, the reason I don't have Ari in S is that I think she's a little bit too complex in the
Can
sense
be a
there's
bit
too many
hard.
options. There's too many options, in my opinion. It's like you can feel really overwhelming. And even some of the things we talked about in Bronze and Iron, where like sometimes just where you put your damage into like can be rough at times with Ari because
Yeah.
unlike every other champ on this list, even into the C tier, your champ does very little damage relative
Mm.
to other champions, in my opinion. Right?
Yeah.
Very little damage. So you have to really pick your timing when you go in really well, even more than Vex, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is actually one of those champs where I would say in low silver, it's actually really quite hard, but high gold, it's really good. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like, this is the tricky thing with tier lists, guys. We've tried to separate it a little bit, but Ari is one of the champs where there's a very big difference between like a silver 3 Ari and like a gold 2 Ari.
Yeah.
Like it's just night and
Very
day.
big
So I,
difference.
I I
Yeah.
just think that like for the most part, she's in that realm of like
Yeah.
good to learn, good reference points, but not overly simple.
Mhm.
And you've got, look, Vigar, I think Vigar, clean reference points. You're rewarded for good quality ability usage. You're rewarded for good quality wave management. You're
Mhm.
rewarded for saying no. You're rewarded for getting to neutral objectives early. I think that's what Vigar is great at. It has very clear conditions that need to be met. And if you meet those conditions, you're going to have a good time. And if you don't meet those conditions, you're going to have a very bad time. So I like Vigar for teaching a very like straightforward, borderline black or white way of
Yeah.
playing League of Legends. And this is probably the last time that you'll see it. Like, because I think as you start to get to platinum and
Mhm.
above, the champion
Yeah.
reduces in its effectiveness and how much it's going to
Yes.
teach you. So this is probably the time where like you're going to be able to milk the value from the champion. And then Echo, similar to what we've been mentioning, it has high wave clear. And this is where me and AJ differ. I think AJ
Yeah.
would put would put Echo way lower. So
Mhm.
your major criticism, AJ, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you feel like it's too forgiving. Like it won't teach you the
Yeah,
fundamentals.
yeah, like getting specific, it will teach you some fundamentals really well. It's a double-edged sword. That's how I
Yeah.
see Echo.
Yeah.
It teaches you some fundamentals insanely well, like your ability to push and move, leverage the side, go from flanks, be creative with your W, learn how to use your W effectively, right? I think it teaches all of that stuff really well. But some things I think it doesn't teach very well is, yeah, sure, you can mess up your wave states in the early game, but once you hit a wave clear breakpoint, you never really had to think about your wave state ever again. You
Right.
push and then you move. You push and then you move, right? So I think in that regard, it doesn't really teach that aspect well outside of the first few levels. I think it teaches you really poor quality threat assessment, in my opinion, because
Mm,
what happens is that somebody, I'm imagining a silver or gold player, they go in with Echo, they take a poor fight. They probably might not even review that fight because they are out and then they disengage and there's
right.
no play anymore,
Whereas
right?
a
So
lot of these
that's
other champs, like Vex,
yes,
for example, Nefuri, like you're
yes,
gonna have to really like
yes,
it's clear. It's clear.
yeah,
That was not a good engage angle. I get
yes,
what you mean,
exactly.
totally. For me, where overrides it, why I put it so highly is because I think it teaches mid game, like
Mhm.
and side laning, probably better than any other champ in the game. And
Right.
that's what I think. I think like, and it's rare to have a champion that teaches mid game so well. Like what I love about Echo is that it's like, okay, you have this clear reference point. I got to get to my 2 items. I get to like Nash's Lichbane, and then if I get to those 2 items and I can rip up the side lane, you can learn so much about what it
Yeah.
feels like to pressure the side,
Right.
like get towers, like drag, waste people's time, shove
Right.
and move, fog wall. Like I agree. I think from like an early lane and sometimes from that maybe even fighting, sure, but I think that the mid game for me makes up for it. So
Mm.
look, that
Right.
I think some people get a lot from it. Maybe some people won't get a lot from
Yeah.
it. I think it depends on what you
I
want to
agree.
learn. If you want to learn lane, probably not the greatest. If you want to learn
Yeah.
mid game, I think it's really good. Okay, so moving on to C tier. These are champions that maybe a little bit more niche. Still, some of them are a little bit harder than others. So look, okay, so we got Galio. Galio, I think, look, Galio is a champ that it doesn't teach you everything. It doesn't teach you amazing lane fundamentals. That's
Mhm.
the reality. It doesn't teach you, and it doesn't teach you great matchup understanding either. Not to say it can't, but nowhere near as well as these champions. What it does teach you is skirmishing. It will teach you skirmishing. It will teach you win conditions. It will teach you how to play around neutral objectives. It will teach you certain things. I would say Galio is a double-edged sword, like Echo. It teaches you certain things really, really well, and certain things maybe not so well. Like you're not going to learn sophisticated wave management. You're not really
Mhm.
going to learn good quality warding and leaning. You're not going to learn like there's a lot of other stuff there that you're not going to learn, and even resource management because you know you're quite hard to kill in lane, and you're building D shield in certain matchups like you mentioned. So I think
Yeah.
that it's good in the sense that it has a clear identity and teaches these aspects that I mentioned. Other aspects it doesn't. What do you think? Want anything else on that one?
Yeah, so I think Galileo is one of those. It kind of shows the problem of a tier list as well, in my opinion, because I think a silver would be really valuable for Galileo, in
Yeah.
my opinion, because it still teaches you how to fight. You don't have to over-index your lane fundamentals yet as a silver player, in my opinion. You're still sort of getting a feel for the game and fighting and skirmishing and utilizing, pushing and moving, playing for the map. So it teaches you that aspect really, really well, as you said. But I think, if you're a gold player, I would really try to stay away from Galio, in my opinion, because you just don't learn very much about laning phase. Like, I think this is one of the champions out of every champ in the list that's, around him. So all the S and A champs and even the B champs, he doesn't really teach you lane at all, right? Like if we look at Ari, like I said, the first few levels is Ari will teach you like even Echo, right? If we compare Echo to directly to Galio, Echo's teaching you the early lane management even better than Galio is. So I think
Yeah.
that's really the major reason that puts
Mhm.
Galio lower. It's like if you want, right, and it's the easiest thing to do, you can just not interact with your lane. You can even build defensive if you want as Galio,
Yeah,
and then now
that build doesn't teach you that much. Yeah, it's
exactly,
not good.
and now you're really and because think about it, like
Mm.
people are always about getting feedback. So if you're a Galio main or you're trying to learn Galio, and you're like, look, I'm not really winning with the AP one. Instead of getting curious about what I'm doing wrong, you might feel very incentivized. Fuck it, I'm just gonna go to the tank one, and you have way more success. But then you're not
That's what I
learning jack
do.
shit.
That's what I do.
Exactly.
I say that
That's
all
the
too
problem I have
often.
with Galio. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, and I keep telling people you got to learn the full AP version of
Yes.
Galio because that's how you actually learn with the champion. Because at least then it's less forgiving. You go in
Yes.
on the wrong target, you're going to get punished for it. Whereas
Yes.
Galio with the tank build, you can be you sloppy around the edges and get away with it. So I agree with what you said. I think it's good in slow silver. High gold, you got to be a bit more careful.
Yeah. I agree.
Not going to teach you as much. I would say Lissandra is a champion that it's just not going to teach you in really good amazing lane fundamentals, right? Because your trading in lane is really average, right? It's
Yeah.
not like you have the ability like a Victor or a Syndra or an Ori where you can time trades with last very reliably. Your Q is so low range. Your W ability is basically useless in the lane. Your E ability is basically useless. You've kind of got like one trading ability,
Yeah.
and you're a little bit too reliant on like again, like if we're talking trading in lane, you're not going to learn much.
Yeah.
Will you learn a little bit about resetting? Sure. Will you learn a little bit about tempo? Sure. Okay, what you'll notice, and this is again a theme as I'm going through this, these champions will teach you certain things really well,
Yes.
right? But they're not going to give you the complete picture.
Mm-hmm.
These champs basically, for the most part, maybe minus Echo, give you the complete picture. And that's the problem. So again, Lissandra will teach you great awareness of your jungler. It will teach you how to play around neutrals. It will teach you resets. It will teach you certain aspects. But it won't teach you trading very well in lane. Like you can completely bypass trading.
Yeah.
And so imagine you're a Lissandra main for a second and you played like 100 games with Lissandra. Is that going to flow on to any of these champs? Parts of it, a lot of it, no. Like a lot of it, no. And that's the problem. And same thing for a lot of these other champs. Like I would actually put in, these two are very similar. I would even say, I mean, look, I would even loop in some of these as well. They're quite similar to these ones as well. So they will teach you certain aspects, but some aspects no. So let's actually, I think we can probably group these together. These three together.
Mm-hmm.
They're just, again, look, very skill shot oriented, hard to pull off. I think they also, okay, so the thing that scares me with these three champions, and this is, I would say, similar to Hwei, is that you can really enter this non-interactive style of play. That's the thing that scares the shit out of us. It's like you get a client, they come in and they're playing Hwei who's queuing the wave, or a Xerath that's just queuing the wave on repeat, or a Vel'Koz Wing the wave on repeat. You're not really learning what it is to be a lane, like to be an actual lane bully. Now you can play these champions in a way that's actually very conducive for learning, but we can't guarantee that. We can't guarantee that. So I think if piloted well and if piloted with intention, sure, you probably can learn a lot of fundamentals, but I do think you can easily bypass a lot of lane fundamentals. You're just mindlessly shoving in waves. You're not thinking about your wave management. You're not thinking about your trading. You're not thinking about all these other aspects, such that you're gonna, you're just not really as rewarded. Is that Would you add anything there?
Yeah, one thing I'll add is that I think another thing that can be difficult for people when they're playing these champs is even just the out-of-game review aspect. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you go into a fight as Xerath, right? How do you know as a silver or gold player if the reason why you lost the fight is because you missed all your abilities, or because you didn't time your abilities well, or because it was a bad fight to take? How are you supposed to figure that out? Right? If I go into a fight as Xerath and you land every ability, you don't have the sophistication to understand when or why or how to land your abilities. It's like it feels so helpless. It's like, I don't know. I guess I missed everything, so I lose this fight. And so it's very hard, in my opinion, with these champs, especially at around this like rank bracket, to hold yourself to a high enough standard to do like what Curtis was saying, where you value your trades, you focus on the on laning fundamentals, and then when it comes to the midi game, you focus on actually playing that artillery style, and you're actually trying to break down why you're missing abilities or why this is a bad fight, and not chalking it up to, oh, I'm playing a champ that's very micro intensive, I missed everything, I guess I lose, right?
And I'm going to just speak from my anecdotal experience. I learned the game through these lenses. That's what I learned the game through, and it bit me in the ass massively. I just over-index on skill shots. I had this extremely narrow view of the game, and a lot of the skills I developed didn't flow onto many other champions. And I had many painful experiences trying to learn champs like Ari or a lot of divers, and I struggled really, really, really hard because I'm like, oh, if I land skill shots, that's it. And I could bypass a lot of aspects of the game. So not amazing. And look, Brand, again, like I think it's okay in terms of easy execution. Silver players will probably get a lot of value from it, but it can be a little bit too training wheels oriented, right? Where you're just kind of smashing in waves. You're not having to be super sophisticated with your trading patterns. It doesn't really facilitate good quality lane fundamentals. So yeah, that's that. And then you have, I would say, put all these three together. So similar to what we were mentioning before, these champs will teach you particular aspects of the game really, really well. And I want to shout out Alados for a second, who's also an MLA coach, a Kassadin enthusiast. I do think Kassadin can really teach you what a good quality engage and bad engage looks like. It can teach you poise. It can teach you playing in accordance to your key spikes, knowing when you're strong and when you're weak. It can teach you how to say no to fights. It can also teach you, I would say sometimes resets, but resets is iffy because resets go hand in hand with wave management. The problem with Kassadin and Zed a lot of the time is that you're not in control over the wave. And so when you're not in control over the wave, you're limited in what fundamentals you can learn. Warding and leaning go out the window because you're not really getting prior. And even if you do get games, you have mobility. You're not getting wave control. So wave management is a lot harder and less intuitive to learn. Your trading patterns in lane for Kassadin specifically, are just weird and not really. You're super low range and not until 6. And then your trading patterns are quite awkward. So there are certain aspects that, yes, you do learn really, really well, and other aspects you don't really learn at all. So they're a bit of a double-edged sword, a lot of these champions. So they're not terrible. I think they're okay. But if you want to learn assassins, we would probably much prefer, these ones over here.
Yeah, agreed. And one thing I'll add about Zed is, look, his reference points are very, very clear, right? Like Curtis was saying, there's some things they teach really well. Like Zed has really clear reference points. It's very obvious to tell when you went in poorly, right? A lot of micro things to learn. But what I will say is that some aspects of Zed's kit is not intuitive or things that aren't translatable to other assassins, other champs, right? Like, for example, if you're playing Zed, the idea of sitting back and playing really far back and using your Q and playing like a spellcaster, that sounds so counterintuitive as an assassin, right? You can't translate that very well. Like if I go from Zed and I'm like, okay, well, I'm done playing Zed. I want to try a different assassin, right? Like
Kali, it would be weird.
Kali. It's not even remotely, even though they're both assassins, they're not even remotely the same champion at all. So that's the problem I was Zed specifically, and even Diana. They have very, very specific things that are not intuitive. Like real quick, just to harp on Diana. Diana is a champ that rewards you for hitting multiple people with your combo, right? All your damage is AoE. Which is kind of weird because you're playing a champ that's designed to be an assassin. You isolate targets, but you're rewarded for AoE. It's like that's not intuitive. So that's my main problem specifically with Zed and Diana, right? You have very unintuitive aspects of their kit that when you develop these skills with these champions, it's very hard to translate into similar champions that are within their realm, right? So like other assassins or like even like an Aura would be hard to learn in my opinion. And so that's my main problem with Diana and Zed.
Yeah, and I will say that actually, just riffing on the Zed thing, a lot of people get success with Zed because they're actually playing Zed like Zed teaches lane in a weird way, like a mage. Like your WEQ combo is like a mage combo.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So then you've got parts of your kit that are very mage like, and then you've got parts of your kit that are very assassin like. That's very overwhelming. That's very unique. It's super, super unique. So I think that, like, what I would much prefer is like play a mage, learn how to poke your opponent, play off your cooldowns, and then play another assassin. That way you would be able to isolate the skills a lot easier.
Yeah.
And then also I would say, like, I think a lot of people can get success with Zed, but then they're getting success with Zed for the wrong reason.
Yes.
They're like just poking the enemy out with a WEQ combo, but they're not actually winning because of their assassin fundamentals.
Right.
So I think Zed it's not that it's not effective. I want to make this very clear when we're going through this. This is not about effectiveness, guys.
Yeah.
Right? This is not about effectiveness. This is about what's actually going to develop skills that will help you climb in the long run. Okay? I think it's just important to just say that. Okay, and then we have all these champs down here. This is where we're either getting too complex or I would say in Hui's case, Hui is a combination of what we mentioned before, can encourage non-interactive gameplay with you're just spamming on QE on the wave. Also can be a little bit complex with the abilities, etc., etc. I would say though, like if you're on gold, I think Hui is a lot better than it is in silver. Like if you're on gold 2, sure. If you're in silver 4, probably not the champ that I'd be recommending. And also just Hui, again, if piloted well though, if you were playing Hui with intention, and you're like slow 2-stacking waves and constantly trying to proc your passive and looking for QQs and all these other abilities or EEQWs, then sure, it would actually teach you a lot about the game, and I actually wouldn't mind it. But it's just no guarantee. I think Hui just is going to be piloted incorrectly. Talia it's just a little too complex still, I think. It's a lot of utility in the kit that needs to be utilized with the R. The heavy skill shots. and does have that element of Talia. I found with Talia is that, and again, people can play it in a non-interactive way where
Yeah.
they're not really engaging very
Mhm.
often. And I just think it can develop particular skills. I do think it teaches mid game quite well, and it can
Yeah.
teach man advantages, and it can teach shoving and moving really quite well. But I think it also falls onto the similar category of Zed, where I feel like there are other champions that would allow you to isolate the skills better. Let's
Yes.
learn mage things and then
Yeah.
let's learn other things, and then we'll come back to Talia. Talia is like a combo, it's like a champ that scales with game understanding, and it's a champ that has it's multifaceted. So it's not great to dive. It's like diving into the deep end with Talia. You got to
Yeah.
be good at both the champs like Ari, and let's say Galio
Yeah.
and like a Victor or something. You got to
Yeah.
be good. Then you can probably leverage Talia.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Do you
really love
anything?
that. Yeah, I love that analogy you gave where it's like this champ has things that are somewhat not intuitive towards learning her. It's like
Mm,
because she has so much wave clear, because her base damage early game is not the best, you feel very incentivized to not interact with the enemy. But in reality, like you said, you need to have the aspect of that victor mentality in lane and play to punish the enemy,
mm.
play to harass them under turret, play to look for high quality trades when when their abilities are cooldown. But that's not really an intuitive thing to learn is Talia because her Q isn't like the longest range ability in the
Mhm.
world. It's not like a Victor E, right? Her Q is also very difficult to land. It's her
Yep.
main damaging ability. It can feel very overwhelming and not intuitive to actually learn each separate
Yeah.
diverging skill, which is what you're
The
referencing.
trading is weird as well. And
Yes.
also you're punished for using your E in lane because your mana
Yes.
costs are so high. So you just have to
Yeah.
reset all the time. So you got this weird dynamic between, do I trade? Do I play for the wave? Do I shove and move? Do I reset? Like, what do I do? Like,
Yeah.
when do I do it? It's just quite overwhelming with the amount of
Yeah.
options you have. Lux, again, similar to Way, it can have a non-interactive style. I think Lux can teach good fundamentals. I
Yeah.
think it actually can. It can be scary. I think when I see a luck player, it's no guarantee that they're going
Yeah.
to play it correctly.
Yeah.
So to be honest, we should have had a subcategory of champs that like can be good if
Yeah.
piloted well.
Right.
Like I think like these ones,
And the way
yeah,
Xerath,
Zera,
Ziggs,
yeah, all of these
all they're
ones,
all the same bracket of champs. Like
same
I
bracket.
would categorize them all very similar. It's like it's up to the individual person piloting them to get the leverage to learn the skills. But from my experience, I haven't seen it, and there's no guarantee that that person is going to hold
Yeah,
themselves to a standard to actually do it because you don't need to
yeah.
improve with these champs. That's the problem I have with these champions.
Yep, exactly right. And then we have these three. So,
Yeah.
okay, so let's go with them one by one because I think they're very
Yep.
different.
Yep.
Akali. Now, you're a long-term Akali player. You've
Hmm.
probably coached a lot of Akali.
Yeah.
What do you think about Akali here in BTO?
Yeah, so she's really interesting. I think on one hand, so she's kind of similar to Zad, but just one step further, in my opinion. Right? She teaches some things really well. Like your trading in lane has got to be on point with a call. You've got to
Yeah.
learn how to, as a melee champ, how do I get in there? How do I know what damage to take so I can get my damage off? Right?
You've
Because
got
you're
to be
very committal.
very intentional with combos as
Yes.
well.
Which is that's a great thing in my opinion for learning an assassin or just learning a melee mid, right? Very, very good thing. It teaches you how to manage your resource. So even though you don't have mana, you do have to manage your energy quite well, in my opinion, as I call it, like with your Q usage, right? It teaches you how to play for stacking waves, and you can't buy like unlike the Hui and Xerath, it's the exact inverse. You have such bad wave clear, but in my opinion, that's actually a good thing for learning the game because that teaches you, okay, how am I really intentional with the waves? How am I stacking waves? How do I create a pushing wave in the side lane in the mid game, right? It teaches you so many things about the waves and the minions because you have no choice, or you're gonna get punished severely for not doing that. So those are the things that are great about Akali, right? Now, I think the reason why Akali is in an S champ is that again we're talking about silver gold. I think it's still a little bit too complex in my opinion. There's too many things like often like the thing I always say the most about Akali players is they miss passive autos. But the thing is they don't even have the mental stack to even comprehend
It's
how
so
to
similar
min-max.
to Annie, AJ.
Yes.
Think about it, actually.
Exactly.
It's a
Yes.
champ that can teach you amazing
Yes.
fundamentals, but it's just so hard.
Yeah.
And so it's like if
Exactly.
we just wait a little bit longer in your journey, if we could get you to platinum,
Yes. You're
then
golden.
Akali becomes an
Yes.
amazing kind of champion to play.
Yes.
Akali is just too much. It literally is an amazing kit.
Yeah.
Annie and Akali. The world is your oyster when you're playing
Yeah.
these champions. You can learn everything and anything
Yeah.
with these champions, but it's just very hard,
Yeah.
right? And so if we're talking in silver and gold, do you really want to take on that difficulty yet? Like I would argue that if you were to play again any of these champions, you would learn the necessary skills to learn the underlying fundamentals. So when you eventually did pick up these champions, you would actually be able to leverage the
Yes.
kits, and you would
Yes.
you would actually learn so much later on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would actually say they're just similar. They're
Yeah.
basically the
I
same.
agree.
It's just the assassin and mage version of that.
Yeah. Exactly right.
But notice what's the trend? What's the common thread as well here? Wave clear. They're both
Yeah.
like wave clear, and so you need to make up for that in Akali's lens through trading and getting in the enemy's face
Yes.
and really pushing that. And same thing with Annie. You need to be
Yep.
autoing, you leveraging your auto attack range, eating certain abilities, sidestepping abilities, utilizing that movement speed. Like there's so much there that you need to do and unpack. It's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then look, Nico, I think it is a good kit. I think it does teach good trading in lane, good ability usage. I think it teaches good lane fundamentals. I just think it can be a little bit complex and not forgiving. Like
Yeah.
I think it's just it's similar, I guess, actually, in many ways to these champs, where it can teach a lot about the game. I think it has a kit to potentially teach you everything, but it's just very, very complex. A lot of skill shots, you're low range, and especially as you move into mid game, because you're low range, you need to either just disguise as things. You need to get very creative with your engage windows. You need to be hyper aware of your teammate's location. You need to know how to get to places. I've just found that Nico, just in reality, in practicality, just from anecdotal, just from what I've seen, just doesn't work. Like on paper, it ticks every single box. But the amount of times I see a Nico, they're like 5-0 in the lane. They rock up into mid game. They start struggling in the side lane. They start going They miss a few engage windows. They don't know they overwhelmed with how to use the passive, and then they just get outscaled. And it's like that's just what happens in reality.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just too complex. It's just too complex. The difficulty of execution, especially moving into the mid game, very hard, I think.
Right. One thing I'll add is that I feel like Nico is like the inverse of Echo, right? I was saying how Echo is a little bit more forgiving in the mid game, and that teaches you the mid game fundamentals, as you were saying. I think Nico, because she's so unforgiving, she's got that also double edged sword where it's like, unlike Echo, you learn the lane really freaking well, right? Really, 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 really good laning fundamentals you learn. But as you said, the mid game can be so unforgiving that it can be very, very difficult to even know how to approach, right?
True.
So I think, like, to be honest, if it were me, I would play Echo and Nico together. I think they complement each other really, really well. Echo teaches you the things that you struggle with Nico, and Nico will teach you things you struggle with Echo. So that's just my 2 cents. Like Nico's like the inverse of Echo. So like whatever we said about Echo, just flip that around, and that's Nico for you, pretty much. That's my view on the channel.
Interesting. And then we have D tier. So we put, I just want to start with Seraphine and Morgana. We put them here because they're too training wheels oriented. You're not interactive enough. You're not going to engage with the fundamentals. You're just going to sit there and wave clear. That's why we put Malzahar so low as well. You're not really I mean, look, I think we're a bit mean to Malzahar. I'd maybe put Malzahar in D, to be honest. I don't think it makes I think Mal should be here. But it's all for the same reason. Not interactive enough. You're not going to learn the underlying lane fundamentals. Not to say you can't be effective with them, but it's not going to teach you the timing trades with last hits, being a bit of a bully, and warding and leaning, and like all the stuff that Victors and Syndras and Oris and all these other champs would teach you. And then Anivia, I would say similar, right? You can bypass too many fundamentals. And TF, look, TF, I mean, no damage either, like similar to Talia, but also just the trading patterns are also just not intuitive. Because think about it, you're low range, your W is low range. You have to use your red card a lot quite creatively to get the AoE slow off. Your Q is hard to land. It also encourages a non-interactive style of play where you're just constantly wave clearing. And you've got to have super sophisticated understanding of win conditions. And there's a lot of complexity there that is just... I wouldn't say it's on the same level of complexity as like an Azir, but there's a lot of macro game concepts that it's just like, why are we learning that now? Let's just not worry about that. Let's just come to that later on. It's just too much too early on. From a macro perspective and laning trading, like people completely implode when it comes to TF laning because they don't know how to reconcile the idea of like flicking through cards, using those red cards situationally. When do I red card? When do I gold card? And if you don't know how to create win cons and identify win conditions and really create man advantages and limit tests in the side lane, you're just going to struggle. It's just super overwhelming.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add about TF, Seraphine, and Morg, all three of these, I kind of group these in the same problem that we talked about in the bronze and iron one. Actually, is that it's very easy to over-index in that supportive style on these champs.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest reasons. Like TF, you can get a lot of leverage if the only thing you do is you play fights and you gold card, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what TF is known for, right? Seraphine, a lot of leverage with just pressing W. So like the problem I have with these champs is like you said, too much training wheels now, but also like you can leverage your utility aspect too much, in my opinion, and that bypasses a lot of fundamentals, in my opinion, which I'm
Yep.
not really comfortable with. Again, these tier lists are meant for improving at the game, the speed at which you improve at the game, and I think these champs are not great for actually teaching you things about mid lane.
Agreed. And then, so lastly, size of the pools here in silver and gold. I mean, look, I think you can expand to two, like eight
Yeah,
silver and gold. I think you can.
yeah,
If you still want to do down the one route and then champ cycle, that's also fine. But I think
yeah.
it's completely fine to have two. I would not even have three. I would not have
No,
three. No way. Too
no.
early on. Still just two champions.
Yeah,
That would be the way to go.
yeah,
So this here is the Emerald 4 and above, what we would call the high elo tier list. Now, there's a few housekeeping things that we need to start with. Now, the first question you're going to say is, what about the platinum players? What should the platinum players play? Well, if you're a platinum player, the world's your oyster. You can start to play more complex champions. So if I was in platinum, I would still, consider what we mentioned in the silver and bronze tier list. But now this would be kind of the framework that you would overlay on that. And so it will make more sense as we go through it, but you can basically play whatever you want from, in my opinion, from Platinum 4 and above. It means you're probably good enough at the game to be able to utilize and learn the more complex kits. Now, let's get into, first and foremost, what the hell do these categories even mean? Because this is the first thing that we need to cover here. So first things first, we have Evergreen. What this essentially means are these are champions that they stand the test of time. If you look at, which we will get into later on, some high elo kind of players, OPGGs, these champions are basically always, or relatively always, in the high elo meta, right? Rain, Hail, or Shine. If you main these champs, you have them in your core pool, you can't really go wrong with them. They're very consistent. Going to be around have been around for many years and will continue to do so. These ones here, this second list, are ones that are more counterpick situational, what we would say is great to have as a third champion in your pool, right? So you're not really going to blind them. You don't really want to OTP them, but they're very good as situational counterpicks. Then we have Aurora. Aurora is new. We don't really have enough data to back up Aurora. We'll come back to that later. Then we have the mostly OTP. So what we mean by mostly OTP is that there are a lot of players who OTP these champions in the high elo bracket. So you'll see Akshan OTPs, Yasuo OTPs, Cassia OTPs, etc. You don't have to OTP them. You also see people to trick these champs, or some pro players will be able to play Cassia, or some pro players will be able to play Yasuo. So you don't need to OTP. But I would say more often than not, there's a lot of OTP players with these ones. Then we have OTP two-track champ. These are the champs that are definitively OTP and two-track champions. And then we have the meta-dependent and seasonal. So these are ones that can, be really good to have in your pool core champions. They can be niche third pick, counter pick champions. Sometimes they're even OTP champions. You will see Azir OTPs. You will see Jace OTPs. You'll see Nico OTPs, Ryze OTPs. But in terms of their effectiveness, they really depend on the meta and what's happening at the current time. So, for example, Azir will come in and out of the meta. It will be very, very strong for a particular, maybe a few months, and then it will just disappear off the face of the planet. Same thing for Nico, Jace, etc., and we'll come back to that later. And then we have at the very bottom champs that are just very difficult to make work in the higher elo brackets. So the champs that we just typically wouldn't recommend playing in your champ pool. So that's kind of the high level categories. Now, before we actually tackle this high elo tier list, what we want to do is show you an OPGG just to kind of share with how we came to these conclusions. So what we have here is a very long-term high elo Korean challenger mid laner. His name is Karis. Now, he's been challenger now since 2020. So as you can see, 2020, he was 1,000 LP. Now, at the moment, as you can see what his pool is, as of, this is split 4, he's got Yone, Orianna, a bit of Hui, etc. But for the most part, he's playing Yone, Orianna, Hui, Tristana, a bit of Ahri, bit of Jace. Now, if we go through the actual splits here for a second, let me just go into champions, and let's go through starting from season 10. What is his most played? We have Akali, we have Orianna, we have Silas, we have LeBlanc, we have Zoe. These are all basically in our evergreen champions. Let's go further on. Let's go to season 11. Silas, Orianna, LeBlanc. Lucian's maybe a bit of a niche one. Maybe that was when Lucian mid was a thing. Maybe it's Lucian bot. Don't know. TF, Akali. Bit of Zoe in there. Bit of Syndra. Same thing. Moving on. Season 12. Ari, Silas, LeBlanc, Azir. Azir must have come back into meta, right? Seasonal in that season. Syndra, Victor, Lissandra. The same champions over and over and over and over again. We go to season 13, split 1. Jace must have been meta. Azir must have been meta again. And then Ari, and then Silas, and a bit of Tali, a bit of Annie weaved in there. That was when Annie was coming back.
Yep.
And then Azir's gone. Look at that. Azir's now not really played as much anymore in this split. And then we've gone back to Jace, Orianna, Syndra being reintroduced. A bit more Akali, Yone. Yep. Exactly right. And as we go through these splits, guys, notice how these champs come in and out of popularity because they're the seasonal champions. But for the most part, the evergreen champions are always present. They're always there. And you'll see this with many, many, many of the high elo, some of the best mid laners in the world. They basically have a similar champion because they're just adapting to what is the meta. And they want to play champions that are evergreen because they're the ones that are effective in high elo season in, season out.
Yes.
Any other comments here, AJ?
No, I mean, just tying back to the whole seasonal evergreen mentality, right? Evergreen means it's good no matter what, right? All year round is good. And you can really see that. That's what we're trying to paint the picture with Karis's OPGG. It's like, no matter what, hail, rain, sunshine, anything, there's always, there's either an Akali or a Syndra or an Ori there, always, or a LeBlanc, one of these evergreen chips all year round, no matter what split we're in, no matter how good the items are for the champ or how bad or the runes, whatever it is, you always see these champions here. Now, for Jason, Azir, right, these are the seasonal champs. So they come, like Curtis was saying, they come in and out. So maybe, for 1 or 2 splits, there's some changes that they do, or maybe it's Worlds patch, so they don't want Azir to be really that strong. So they taper him down. Same thing with Jace. So then they come in and out. So, again, these are champs that they have effectiveness and they can be played often. But it really just depends, especially if you're trying to climb to the highest level, on the meta at the time, right? So that's the picture we're trying to paint here with this.
So with all that being said, let's go ahead and break down the high-low tier list. So what you've got here are a series of what we call, these are just really solid kits. Mm-hmm. Now, there are very particular reasons why these are evergreen champions. Mm-hmm. What you'll notice, for the most part, there's a lot of them. So let's just start with I want to start with one particular category of evergreen champions here, AJ. We have Ari, Akali, LeBlanc, maybe even Silas, and maybe even Yone.
Yep.
Right? And even Talia, actually. These are champions, all champions that have the ability to have a bit of mobility and they can play the side lane.
Yeah.
Right? And this is a very, especially now, I would say the way the game is heading, it's quite important, right? It's quite important to be able to navigate the side lane. And these are champions that you will commonly see. They have mobility. They have good skirmishing. They can play the side lane. They can scrap 2v2. They have a lot of flexibility and also adaptability to chaos for the most part. And so this is a pretty pivotal part of what makes up these champions. But then conversely, what you have is you have some of these mages. You might have the Syndra and the Ori and the Victor. And look, we put Hui in. Hui hasn't been around for that long, but I would imagine that it's going to be quite similar. I think
Hui
has the components that make up a good quality. And the reason why, when we think about these champions, they get a lot of prio. They have a lot of favorable matchups. They can win a lot of lanes.
Yeah.
Good
in a lot of comps.
Good in a lot of compositions, have a lot of skill expression, high skill expression, very high skill cap. Like, for example, if you're playing Syndra, probably arguably some of the highest skill cap in the game. There's an infinite skill cap with Syndra because you can cast your abilities while moving. So if you're very, very good mechanically, there's a lot of a high skill cap that you can reach. You can really, really take your gameplay to the next level. So even though they don't have mobility, they can be played in such a way that you can kind of dominate your lane opponent and again, leverage that to create significant leads. Now, look, it's hard to go into each and why of these. Like, there's a lot of little specifics. Like, I would say, you kind of have the 2v2 oriented champions. So, like, LeBlanc, Ari, Zoe, Silas. These are like what I would call kind of skirmishers. They're very, very good in 2v2s. And as the game you get higher elo, the games get a little bit messier. They're a little bit more skirmish oriented. 2v2 playing with faster pace. Exactly right. Playing with your jungler matters a lot. So playing these champions, junglers can leverage you really well because as junglers get more competent, they can utilize what you're going to offer. So LeBlanc, for example, is a great, and Zoe, these are great examples. For example, if you were to play these champions in gold, the junglers aren't going to know how to play around you and utilize your strength. They won't utilize your strong 2v2. They won't know how to use your prio to then invade and dive sides or pressure or get neutral objectives. Whereas in the higher elo brackets, junglers will know how to utilize it. They will hover you. They will take those 2v2s. They'll use your prio to get neutral objectives. They will invade. They will create favorable scenarios for you so you can leverage and push your lead. What are your thoughts here, AJ, about this?
Yeah, so one thing I just want to say that I really love that you mentioned about the Evergreen champs is the infinite skill ceiling portion. So because these champs have a lot to their kits, there's a lot of flexibility in the way you play, and your skill on your champion directly correlates with your impact in the game, which makes them evergreen, which is why you see the best players always play these champs, right? Like, for example, I come from a Yone background, right? We take Yone, for example, no matter what patch he's on, no matter how weak or strong he is, I can always find a way to make him work. And the reason why is I put so much time into this champ. I've invested so much time, learning his matchups, learning what he's good and weak at, that you can like make him work. You can fight for prio if you need to. You can fight for 2v2s if you need to. You can play the side if you need to, right? And it's just 1-to-1 with your skill level. Right. And real quick, I want to juxtapose that with Azir, because Azir, the reality is with Azir, no matter how good you get with a champ, if he's a weak meta for him, you are not going to get prio early game. Right. If I play Azir and Azir's not in the meta and Galio's in the meta, no matter how good I am at Azir, it's going to be almost impossible for me to utilize that part of the game. So the game might be too fast for Azir at that particular point. So that's why we have an evergreen section and a seasonal section, again, because these evergreen champs, the infinite skill ceiling can scale with every aspect of the game that you need for a high elo player.
And notice the way we've ordered them as well. Yes. Like we have Victor down at the bottom because Victor is probably one of the weaker mages. Like look, some may argue he's even slightly meta seasonal dependent. For the most part, if we're talking again over the years, like over the past decade, whatever, like he has been around for a very long time on high elo, but he's nowhere near as reliable and consistent as like a Syndra or like an Ahri for that matter, because these champions have more flexibility. They actually they can do more. They can 2v2. Syndra has self peel and CC, you know, and so the skill expression with Syndra is just higher. So hopefully this gives you a bit of an indicator of champ. So if you're looking at this, say you're an Emerald player, you're a Diamond player looking at this, like you may say, okay, well then what does this mean? Well, this means that these are champs that are great to have in your pool as a core set of like your core two. Like you cannot go wrong with shaping or morphing your pool around these champions. So like, let's say for example, you had a core two of Syndra Akali or Syndra LeBlanc, or Ahri Zoe, or Talia Ahri, or Syndra Talia. Like any of these combinations of champions are great. And you can't really go wrong with that. And that's going to make up a really good baseline. It's like the recipe of like a beautiful pool. Okay? Very, very important. So then we move on to counterpicks. So these are champions that, you know, they can't be blinded, especially as you get to higher elo. You're gonna struggle if you blind pick them. They will have games where you can borderline turn them into auto wins. Right. So that you look at the draft like, oh my God, this is like an amazing TF game or an amazing Galio game. And this is why these are champions that I would not really have per se as my core two, but they're beautiful third champs. Because also the great thing about these champs is that they're not overly complex. Like you don't need to play a shit ton of games of Galio to have him in your pool. You could play him one in every 6 games and do just fine if you pick him in the right composition. So you can have him as your core two, but I would consider these more situational counterpick champions and can just single-handedly win you games if picked in the right situation. And you'll commonly see them in high elo games. Like we've had metas. Wasn't there a Worlds like not even longer? Was it a year ago or 2 with
2
Annie?
years ago?
With
yeah, that's right.
And they were all playing Annie, and Annie came into the meta and was used as a niche counterpick. You'll see Vex situationally in competitive games. You'll see TF. Galio. You'll see Galio. You'll see all these champs very situationally. Veigar, if picked in the right situation. So these are what I would consider very good situational picks to round out your pool. So a great El Clasico pool might be, okay, I want to play Syndra, I want to play LeBlanc, and then you might round it out with like a Lissandra or a Galio. And that would be a very good kind of trio pool that will work all the way through to very high elo.
Yeah, one thing I like that you said, and that I really want to emphasize, is that you don't need a lot of games on these champions if you're playing them in good games, right? Like if you play Galio and it's a great Galio game, you don't need a ton of mastery on Galio to put in work. Now, what I will say, what's really important for context, is that if you want to main these champions and you want to, for some reason, make this a core champ, that's where you have to get very specific, and these champs become a lot less effective in general, and you put a lot more work, right? So if you want to become a TF like he's one of your core two, you're gonna have to put a lot more work in than somebody who's like, yep, this is a great game, STF. I'm gonna get to Akali. I have a Nocturne, right? We have two global ults. I slay MTF. I can put in a lot of work. So there's just something to keep in mind, guys, that when you're
Yes.
developing your pool, these categories help shape how much work also, in my opinion, you need to put into these champs to get effectiveness, right? Like again, a lot of work if you want to one trick some of these champs in this yellow column here with the Vigar and the Annie.
Yeah.
It's,
And not to say that it can't work, like you
yes.
said, exactly right. If you're going to do it, if you want to be an OTP or two trick with these champions, you're
Yes.
going to have to put in a boatload of work
Yes.
and really push your mastery to the next level.
Yeah.
And then we have Aurora. So Aurora, new champion, hasn't been
Yeah.
out for that long. Like our hunch together, AJ, is that the kit is amazing. A
Yes.
beautiful kit. It is actually designed, in my opinion, to be a high elo champion, right? It's got
Yeah.
high skill expression, you've got mobility, you've got 2v2 threat, you've got wave clear. It's literally like the perfect kit.
Everything.
It's
Yeah.
literally everything. You got everything. So our hunch is that Aurora will actually become an evergreen
Yes.
champion. Look,
Want to
again,
see.
we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Our hunch is that it probably will be, but we think that the kit is fundamentally just very, very, very good. Now, moving on, we have these mostly OTP champs. So, look, similar to what you said before, to be honest, if you're going to play these
Yeah.
champions, they require a lot of time and energy. And
Yeah.
like, like for example, I come from a Casio background. I can, play Casio
Yeah.
whenever. I've played Casio for years. But you will see certain OTPs like Hunter Vault play with them and
Yeah.
they will complain like, oh yeah, this is like a borderline unwinnable game for Casio.
Yep.
So like, I don't recommend people
Yeah.
OTPing these champs, specifically
Yeah.
Casio, because like you're going to have some brutal games, but you will be rewarded for it because there is high skill expression. So
Yeah.
these are champs that like you can have as your core pool, you can, but just be careful not to overdo it. They will require a lot of time and a lot of energy, and casually playing them, you will get punished for it, especially as you start to get to like the GM plus.
Mm-hmm.
Like GM plus, if you want to play them, you're gonna have to take your mastery to the next level.
Yeah, and just from anecdotal experience myself, I came from a Yasuo background, and so the first times I hit GM, I was a Yasuo nearly one trick or two trick, and I was still struggling to figure out how the fuck do I go from Masters to GM quality
Yeah.
of player, right? So I can't even imagine someone playing this champ casually and they're trying to get from Masters to GM. So I think the main key difference between this a row here and the one above it with the counterpick one is that you cannot play these champions casually. That's the main
Yes,
difference.
that's the main
You
difference.
cannot play
Exactly
them
right.
casually.
These have the more ease of execution. And if
Yes.
you're casually playing these champs, you'll probably get
Yes.
punished a little bit more.
Yep. That's right.
People may argue, what about Lux? Well, yeah, sure. Lux is not super complicated. Some of these champs aren't super complicated, but still, there is levels to it. And trust me, wait till you watch an
Yes.
actual Lux
A
OTP.
really good Lux player. There's a huge difference.
There's a
And
huge difference.
yes,
Same
a
as
huge
Ziggs as well. Like
difference.
they will annihilate you. Like
Yes.
they know how to get in your
Exactly.
face, utilize their passive. They actually play super aggressive. Like I've watched
Yes.
really good Ziggs OTPs, really good Lux OTPs, and
Mhm.
Ziggs OTPs, and Anivia OTPs for that matter.
Yes.
Even watch Azap on Vel'Koz. It's a different champion.
Yep.
They don't look like they're playing the same champion.
Yep. Any champ like that, I think, is a champ that's deemed worthy. That's a mostly OTP, right? Like if you compare the difference between a good Yasuo and an average Yasuo, it's night and day. And I think that's the same exact thing with Lux, like you mentioned in Ziggs. It's like there's a night and day. When I play against Yozu on Lux, he's like hiding his Q and his W. He's making me sweat for every minion with his E. He has pinpoint accuracy with his R. He knows exactly when to use his R and save his R. Like all of these things are things that only come with tons of time on the champ.
Yeah.
But the thing is, these are invisible things. It's very hard to see if you're not if you haven't played that champ for a long time, or you like, especially if you're outsider looking in, it's very hard to see these small, minute differences. But that is the difference for these champions.
Yeah, 100%. And to be honest, arguably, Annie is also maybe even in here.
Yeah.
Like I would argue that Annie could probably interchange
either
between
one.
this one and this one. Like I
Yeah.
think it's completely reasonable to put Annie in both of these. And then we have the definitive OTP and True Trick champs. These are champs that like you literally like basically have to OTP. If you're
Yeah.
if you're gonna make a push to Grandmaster Plus, you will basically never see a player who plays these casually.
Yeah,
It's impossible.
never.
It's very,
Yeah,
very, very like you don't see someone casually playing Katarina or casually playing
yeah.
like Kassadin. It's just like they're either an OTP or a two trick. And if you do, it's very, 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 very rare.
Uh,
So
Or it's like they like kind of like even reverse it, where like what they do is they get the Hyela first, one trick and cat, and then they branch out, right? Like if we take Catavald, for example, he was a hardcore cat OTP for what, 10, 11 years before he started playing new champs. So like that is the route you have to kind of go on these champs to make them work at a high level. That's just the reality of these champs, right? And that's what we're trying to express here with this rose. Like unlike the one above it, where it's like you can cycle like an Akshan, you can play like 100 games of Akshan and cycle.
yeah.
If you're a cat OTP, you better be a cat OTP. You can't cycle that champ out.
Yeah, and also I would say as well is like a lot of these champs play in a relatively unique
Yes.
way. So like the
Yes.
skills you develop with these champions won't necessarily fully flow on to the other champ. Like for the like if
Yes.
you say for example you got to master tier with Echo or like
Yeah.
let's say Vlad or Talon, it's
Kassadin.
not necessarily or Kassadin, it's not necessarily fully going to flow into a lot of other champions. Whereas
Yes.
like if you're like a challenger Lux OTP, well that's going to flow into nearly every
Syndra
champion.
really well, called
Yeah,
really well. Yeah,
same
everything.
same a lot of these champions. So
Even with
like that,
Yasuo, I did it
even with
myself.
Yasuo, yeah. So like
Yeah.
I think that a lot of these champs are just very very unique.
Yeah.
And then we have the meta dependent ones, like we were mentioning before, the Azir. So
Mhm.
you'll see metas where these are all very good champions.
Yes.
We've had pro player metas where Echo is like pick ban. We've had metas where Rise is super 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 strong. We've had Asol and pro meta, Corki, which then recently like with Tristana and Corki, you know, it was pick or ban, and everyone was playing it
Yeah.
basically every single game. These are just champs that will come in and out of the meta. You know,
Yeah.
look, you will see people OTP them, but if you're
Mhm.
playing these champions in a weak meta, you're very, 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 very limited
Yes.
with how high you can push up in the elo
Yes.
brackets. Mastery will only take you so far,
Mhm.
and that's the downside. That is the downside of maining these champions. And AJ, something you've been talking a lot about is managing expectations. If you're
Yes.
playing these champions, you're limited. You are in a way limited by what Riot do with the game.
Yes.
That's just a reality. And that's not to say you shouldn't play them. Again, it depends on
Manage your expectations.
manage
What do
your
you want out of the game?
expectations. Exactly right. If you want to be a reliable, like you don't want that volatility in your journey, and you don't want to be kind of gatekept by Riot, what they're doing with patches, then you want to be looking up here,
Yes. Exactly.
right? You want to be looking up there. Or if you want to be rewarded hardcore for mastery no matter what, then you go in here. For example, like Zed, regardless of like the meta, like you will see high low Z players.
Yes.
No
Always.
matter what. Always,
Yep.
no matter what. Same thing with talent. Same like look, some may argue with like Kassadin maybe, but like for
Yeah.
the not to say these aren't affected by meta, they definitely are, but not to the same degree.
Yeah.
Not to
Yeah.
the same degree.
Even the evergreen champs, they're affected by meta too. There was a
Yes.
patch where like Silas, when he got reworked, he was like weak. The reality is that guys, when we're making a tier list, we can't encompass everything. We
No.
can't account for every change.
This is for the
We're-
most part.
we're trying to create a framework so you guys understand where we're coming from when we talk about champ pools, what's good, what's bad, right? You guys just got to understand this is just our it's a vague and general
High level.
framework, high level framework about how to approach champions, right? And again, tying back to what I was saying earlier, as an Azir player, I mean, I'm an Azir player myself. If I compare that to my Yone, I would say that again, I'm limited as an Azir. My mastery, like Curtis said, can only take me so far. Right, that is just the reality. No matter what meta I'm in, Yone will be affected marginally less than Azir will. Even though Yone is also volatile, right? Somebody can come up to me and say, "Look, Yone's getting a huge nerf next patch. Like he's not volatile. He is, but it's like how limited I am is not nearly as much as an Azir when he's affected. That's what we're trying to get at with this.
Yep, exactly right. And then we have at the very bottom here, you know, these are gems you just want to avoid. You know, if
Yeah.
you really want to climb to, you know, we're talking
Yeah.
Master Plus, Jam Plus, like just don't do it to yourself.
Yeah.
Not to say you can't. There are players who play the champions. It's just you're making your life very miserable. And like let's just speak on Neferi, right? Like
Yeah.
Neferi by Riot has been it's a low elo assassin.
Yes.
Like it's an assassin that was
Designed for that.
designed for beginners. It's
Yes.
ease of execution. So a champ like this can never be a high. It won't be a challenger
No.
level assassin. It just won't be.
No.
It's too linear. It won't have.
Mhm.
It doesn't have the level of a skill expression that a lot of these other assassins would. And in order to push to challenger with these assassins, they need to have room for skill expression.
Yes.
That's one of the major themes here, and that's why Neferi is very limited.
Yeah.
So that's basically it, guys. Hopefully this gives you a bit of a framework to view it. I'm sure we're gonna have many questions. Me and AJ will be floating around the comment section
Mhm.
trying to answer questions. But Also, thank you for coming on, AJ, and helping with this
Of
one.
course, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. And I will see you guys around for another video soon. Cheers.